I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby, here with Paul Leonard-Morgan, the composer behind Fellow Travelers. And Paul, this score, I was listening to it yesterday, and this score is the cello is very prominent in this, which makes me incredibly happy because I love the cello.
Oh,
And so I'm curious as to what is it about that instrument that made you decide to put it kind of front and center on so many tracks?
everybody loves it. I think that Ron Neisman, the wonderful showrunner, creator, writer, all the above, we'd spoken. He got in touch and said, "Love your stuff. I think it'd be really suited to this." So I said, "Well, look, send me the script. Let me have a look." I'm not very good at reading scripts, so I was kind of like, "Okay, well, look, I think this is absolutely wonderful." But I'm trying to picture their relationship, and he sent me a kind of lookbook kind of thing, all this kind of stuff. And we were talking about it, and I just said that for me, it's fundamentally a love story. Yes, it's the story of, there's the thriller aspect. You've got the McCarthyism, the 60s and so on. But fundamentally, it's about Tim and Hawk, the two main characters. And so I was kind of like, well, look, if it's a love story, then what is the most basic level? You've got Tim, who is this incredibly innocent character at the beginning, and you have Hawk, who is this very guarded, closed-off character. And I was like, right, so we got the cello, we got a piano. Fundamentally, that's the most basic thing you can do. Whenever they're together, they're joining in. Whenever they're single, one of them's a piano, one of them's a cello. And as the story progresses, this is the kind of intellectual argument you start off with soundtracks with. And as the story progresses, then it means that you've then got room to add other instruments. So it's like, okay, we'll add a quartet, but it's going to be a very intimate soundtrack. It's not a big glossy orchestra, which I think sometimes can really get lost in the system. As a composer, you're trying to help the emotions. And I just felt that there's such an intimate soundtrack. Forget about the tons of sex scenes, because it's not sex. It's about a power struggle. It's about who's in charge of the different relationships. So that was really that. It was a case of, well, look, the cello is this beautiful instrument that everyone reacts to and really has that kind of resonance and emotion to.
So and yet at the same time, correct me if I'm wrong, there are moments where you talk about one character being kind of like the piano and another character being kind of like the cello. There are moments where they're very where they're discordant from each other, and there's moments where they seem to be in harmony. I assume that's intentional.
Isn't that life?
Uh,
No, but it's true. There's a haunting moment at the end of episode 1 where Hawk is waiting for Tim to return a phone call. He doesn't know if he's going to be able to see Tim again or not, whether he will return that phone call. And it's a little montage in Hawk's head of times gone by with Tim and so on. And yeah, it's achingly beautiful. And there's just this lonely, lonely piano. And then the cello joins in when it cuts back to the happy memories of him and Tim. And then when it cuts back to Hawk by himself, there's just a few piano notes left. And I think for me, genuinely, that's how relationships are. And there are other moments when there's lots of reverb on it, or the kind of, as you say, the dissonance when the relationship's not going well. But by the ability to have such melodic instruments as the cello and piano, and stuff that's as heart-wrenchingly beautiful as that, it has this profound ability to move people, I think.
And so in creating these individual moments, as you're reading the scripts, I'm so fascinated by the creative process, particularly when it comes to scoring a film or a television show, because I'm always wondering where exactly the melody comes from.
So it's a really good question. And I think if you could bottle that, that idea of where does that theme come from? Where does that, you have to have an emotional response. When people send you, whether it's scripts or rough locks and so on, if you don't have a visceral reaction to something, to art, there's no point in doing it. It doesn't mean that something's wrong or right, but it means that it's moved you in a way. And I think when I'm looking at characters on screen, or the story where it's soaking you in, what it's like if you're on a thriller and you're on the edge of your seat going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, don't do it. Oh, he's about to get caught, he's about to do that. There are those moments when you actually forget. Well, for me anyway, I forget that I'm watching a film when you're really caught up in that moment. And that's a sign of a good film. or a good series, because then it's good editing, good scripts, good music, good everything. Nothing is drawing you out. And for me, the sign of a good soundtrack is when something makes you feel something. And you're not signposting things, and you're not trying to make people almost like cheating it by making you must feel sad or you must feel happy. And I think for me, when you have an intellectual argument at the beginning going, well, this is what I want to achieve, and then you go through 7 or 8 episodes and you've had time to develop those themes, it's always around kind of episode 2 or 3 that you suddenly understand the characters. So 1, you've always been trying to come up with the themes, and you've got these triplets with the quartet. It's this freneticness. But it's only when you start to understand the characters as a composer that you go like, oh, now I can massage this motif. Now I can massage this, because I'm really starting to understand them. And then at the end of episode 8, you're kind of like, I don't want this to end, because these melodies are so intrinsic to everything that these characters do now. As soon as this stops, I can't use this melody again. Yeah, it's so connected to those actors and their characters. So yeah, so I think as you get to know the actors, as you get to know their characters, that for me is when the motifs and the melodies start making sense, because they're just becoming you. It's like, if you wear a blue jacket or you wear a red jacket, that red jacket becomes you. You've got the cello theme, the cello is you. You've got the piano theme, the piano is you.
Well, and so at what point did you feel like you started understanding particularly Hawk and Tim?
It's a really good question. I knew that I'd nailed the sound of the show straight away, and it never happens, like ever. You always kind of go like, what do you think of this? It's just a rough, it's not a rough. I spent hours on it. It's just a quick rough. I sat and played the theme to an iPhone, and I sent it to Ron, and I said, this is your theme. And it was after about a day. I just got it. Right. And I had this whole descending scale, because it was Hawk's descent into his emotional oblivion inside there, and his facade coming down. And I was like, and it just descended into hell, into darkness. And I said, this is it. And then you have Tim's innocence up here. And I just knew that was the sound. And I was trying to say to him, this is going to be the cello, this is going to be that. And I was telling someone this the other day. Ron never got back to me for about 3 days. And of course, as an artist, you're there going, God, he doesn't like it. What the hell is going on? And it turns out he doesn't use WhatsApp. So it's sitting there in his WhatsApp, and I'm like, oh no, well, look, that's the video. Your theme is waiting there. And he got it. And he said, oh, this is absolutely beautiful. So I knew I had the theme, but what I didn't know was how to then use those motifs and use those themes with the characters, because it's great talking about it, and it's great going, yes, that's the sound of it, and this is the energy that it's got, and so on. And it was really, I think for me, there was a moment in episode 1, what we call the toe sucking moment, where Hawk says to Tim, right, etc., etc. And we were chatting about it. I was going, look, it's emotional, but again, it's about a power play, about who's in charge in this relationship. And Ron said, I love the piano, I love the cello, but it needs another instrument. I was like, okay. And I discovered the bass flute. I suddenly thought, this would be quite nice, because it's not romantic, but it's quite sort of sexy, but also because it's so low and it's got such a resonance and depth in it. I was like, okay, so that can be for when they're together. And that way it's not cheeseballing a sex scene. It's not cheeseballing a power struggle theme, but there's something about it that's really edgy. Da, 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 da. That theme then became the third theme almost. I was like, this is brilliant. I've now got Tim, I've got Hawk, and when they're together and there's that power struggle going on, you have this little edgy thing. And then I was like, this is perfect. So we have the quartet, we got that, and then I've got the bass flute. And it's as soon as you got those moments, it's like, okay, now I know the themes, I've got the motifs, I've got the sounds. It all just becomes plain sailing from there.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I heard echoes of Philip Glass in this. And I know you two have worked with. Has he been an influence on you?
I could get those triplets out of my head. I was working on a film called Pigeon Tunnel with Philip last year, and I mean, Philip's an influence on everybody. He's the most wonderful human being out, and a genius. But I think one of the things that becomes apparent when you start working with someone is, I've done 3 or 4 collaborations with Philip, but what becomes apparent is that, okay, well, this is my style. I'm already totally comfy with my style. And you always soak up things from either other people or things that you've done yourself. But Philip's use of triplets, I find brilliant, because what it does is gives an ability to drive an energy to a scene without overpowering stuff. I work with Errol Morris quite a lot. And Errol's wonderful documentaries and films, obviously, they have a lot of voiceover. So you can't overpower the voiceover, but you need something to drive it. And the use of triplets with the do 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 does something, but it doesn't do anything. And it's an incredibly hard thing to do, because if you're doing something, it's naturally going to overpower. But there's something about the use of triplets that does that. So they've crept into my mindset, I'd say, over the last kind of 3 or 4 years. So I've then got my melodies going on with these triplets underneath. And yeah, I think that's the minimal glassisms.
Because this is a show that spans, more than 3 decades, was one of your goals to have the soundtrack kind of like be timeless?
Absolutely. Things you discuss. I'm so glad you pick up on this stuff, because there are things you talk about at the beginning and going, well, what do we want to achieve with this? And you never know whether it does or not. But because it goes between 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on, there's the wonderful disco episode. I think it's episode 7 on Fire Island, I think. And Michael Perlmutter, the music supervisor, his choices of songs in that are just absolutely phenomenal. And I was like, well, look, I can happily go and do funkadelic kind of thing underneath it, but I don't think it needs it, because you have that source music. Whereas if we become true to ourselves and stick with the piano, the cello, the quartet, then it gives it a sonic unity to it. You already know what decade you're in looking at it. And also you don't need to spoon feed the audience into knowing every single thing. I hate that. It's like, make up your own minds. They're clever people. And if they miss it, they'll get it on the second flashback or whatever. But I think what was really fun was, fun's an awful word, because it's the most Hawkins, the whole thing, where Hawk admits to himself that his son has died, and he has a complete breakdown during a threesome. And we had this real funk track going on in the back with the wah guitar. And I took that quartet. We'd been recording at United Studios in LA, really authentic chambers of the Rat Pack. So all these sounds from the 60s had this reverb to it. It was fantastic. And I started just reversing the quartet. And suddenly you had a real subtle moment of this quartet playing the kind of main tune of Hawk and Timber on a full quartet, but then reversed it and added flange to it, put it over the top of that 70s track. No one really spots it. But for me, what's cool about it is it then means that I can then go into my score afterwards, not reversed anymore, but naturally. And it means that the score doesn't pop out of nowhere. It's been intrinsically involved in that tune beforehand. And I like moments like that when you can do things with it, but you're not just using effects for the sake of it. You're actually using technology in a way that no one really spots, but it helps have that seamless transition between score and source.
Was there a particular motif or a particular moment where you actually were moved by what you had written?
I laugh because I was talking to Ron about this the other day. I genuinely felt empty at the end of this series. It doesn't happen the whole time. When you feel you've given something your absolute all, you've had such a close team around you that whether it's the showrunner having your back, whether it's the actors that you can tell have put everything on the screen, at the end of it, you're just emotionally drained. It's like, I never want this to end, because it's like saying goodbye to your family almost. Even though you're now incredibly good friends and stuff, you're never going to get to use that melody again. You're never going to get to use that. And it was the last cue. It was, and it always sounds arrogant when you say, I made myself cry. But the last cue is a 6.5-minute piece of music, which never happens. And I'd gone and I'd written it, and it's the emotional climax of the entire pieces. And I'd said to Ron, who had always had this thing about no piece had resolution. There was never any resolution at the end of a piece because their relationship never had any resolution. So you get to the end of one of the sex scenes, it never resolves onto the tonic of the chord, never onto the root of the chord. It would always stay hanging. Ron's thing was always, the resolution is the next scene starting, boom, which has this weird effect, cumulative effect of, by the end of it, you've listened to 120 cues or how many there are over the series, and not one of them is actually resolved, which means that you're left kind of hanging like their relationship. And the wonderful payoff of that was on the last episode, the last cue of the whole thing, the 6.5-minute thing. I got to combine all of my themes. And you have this, spoiler alert, but you have this wonderful moment where Hawk's going, he wasn't just anyone, he was the man I loved. And it was the first moment of his admitting it. And he's saying that to his daughter. And he suddenly, it's the first moment that he's been able to be himself. So I wrote this thing, and I gave it to Ron. And Ron was like, it's beautiful, but you need to go more out with it. And I didn't want to overpower the scene because the actors were bloody great and everything. He said, there is literally going to be that bit of voiceover and birds. The rest of it is you. So go back and be not more forceful, but you can be less tentative. And again, you know, it's hard because you don't want to overpower it. So I went away and I added quartet and I did this and did that. And I got to the end and we were both watching it together and both of us just welled up and didn't say anything for about 3 or 4 minutes. It was this weird but beautiful but wonderful moment of, it's like a period, it's like a full stop. You know, it's like, oh well, that was great. but it's not often that you like your music, or it's not often that you like what you've done because you're so, not that you dislike it, but you've been so closely caught up in it. And it's just when it's something has that emotional ability to do that by the end of it, it's like, it's a really special moment.
It really is. And like you say, it is a period on the end of, I think, a beautiful sentence.
Yeah, and I think for me, what was lovely about it was the fact that so many people, fans of the show, have got in touch and said every time they now listen to this soundtrack separate of the show, other than the fact they can picture exactly where the music comes in and out, which was obviously quite an honor. But they said, yeah, they listen to it and they tear up every time they hear it. And not in a kind of cheesy emotional way, but just it makes them feel something. It just doesn't happen. And the fact that the show, the subject matter is so of its time, not being able to be yourself, the politics, the fact that you can't necessarily come out or you can't do this or you can't do that. And that's from the 60s. And we're now 60 years on, nothing's changed. So I think it's so important as a show. And again, it doesn't happen with every show, but it's not just a drama. It's a wonderful drama. But in actual fact, the struggles that people have had to get to this point now, and you now have the struggles for women's rights, you have the struggles for everything else, you realize it's like, it's like 2 steps forward and 1 back, which, so to be able to be part of something like this, it is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And to then create something which I'm incredibly proud of also feels like a once in a lifetime. There was just so many things about it, which by the end of it, you're kind of thinking, I could do this forever.
And I could listen to it forever. So
that'll be 0.001 cent on Spotify. Thank you.
Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the upcoming award season. Stay tuned for interviews with more contenders in the coming weeks. Paul Leonard-Morgan, a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.